The arena air was stagnant, heavy with a mixture of resignation and routine. We have seen this segment 100 times before. The champion stood in the center of the ring, the canvas beneath his boots feeling less like a battleground and more like a throne room he had long since stopped fearing. He held the microphone with a loose, arrogant grip, his voice echoing off the rafters, reciting the same list of victims, the same demands for acknowledgement. The crowd offered a low, simmering hum of booing, not the sharp, angry heat of rebellion, but the tired noise of a populace that had forgotten what hope sounded like. The commentary team was filling the dead air with statistics about title reign duration, their voices drifting into a monotonous rhythm that matched the predictability of the moment. Then the shift happened. It wasn't a sound. It was the absence of it. The feed didn't cut. The reality inside the arena simply fractured. The Titantron, usually a blaring billboard of high-definition arrogance, flickered once a violent digital spasm and then died completely black. The house lights didn't dim. They were severed. For 3 seconds, 18,000 people sat in a darkness so absolute it felt physical. The champion's monologue was cut off mid-sentence. Not by interruption, but by the sudden realization that he was no longer the only gravitational force in the room. In that suffocating blackness, the boredom evaporated, replaced instantly by a primal, collective intake of breath. The silence was louder than any pyro. It was the sound of 18,000 people realizing that the script they thought they knew had just been burned. The vacuum was complete. The storm was here. When the first note hit, it didn't sound like music. It sounded like a structural failure. A singular, distorted guitar screech tore through the PA system, vibrating the floorboards and rattling the rib cages of everyone in the front row. The reaction wasn't immediate. It took a split second for the brain to process the impossible. But when the recognition landed, the noise that erupted from the stands was terrifying. It wasn't a cheer. It was a sonic boom of disbelief, chaotic. Shapeless roar of pure adrenaline that peaked the audio meters and sent the cameras into a frantic, shaking blur. Grown men grabbed the strangers next to them. Children stood on chairs. The security guards at the barricade turned around, forgetting their posts to witness the resurrection. The commentary team didn't speak because they couldn't. What can you say when a ghost walks out from behind the curtain? The figure emerged from the smoke, not with the frantic energy of a desperate challenger, but with the slow, terrifying cadence of a reaper coming to collect a debt. Every step down the ramp was heavy, deliberate, and soaked in history. The camera zoomed in on the champion in the ring. His mask of invincibility cracked. His eyes widened, darting from the ramp to the darkened rafters, looking for an escape route that didn't exist. This wasn't just an entrance, it was an invasion. The returning legend didn't play to the crowd. He didn't smile. He stared straight ahead, locking eyes with the man in the ring, his focus narrowing the entire world down to a straight line between the past and the present. The arena shook, not with joy, but with the violent energy of history being rewritten in real time. The climb up the steel steps was agonizingly slow, a masterclass in psychological warfare. He wiped his boots on the apron, a ritual we hadn't seen in years, yet it felt as familiar as breathing. As he stepped between the ropes, the atmosphere inside the squared circle changed density. It became pressurized. The music faded, leaving only the residual ringing in our ears and the chanting of the crowd, a chant that wasn't a catchy slogan, but the rhythmic screaming of a name we thought we'd never hear again. The two men stood 10 feet apart. No punches were thrown. No finishers were teased. It was just a stare, but it carried more violence than a steel chair shot. The commentary team finally found their voices, dropping to a hush, whispering as if they were afraid to break the spell. They spoke of legacy, of the years lost, of the bridges that had been burned to ash to make this moment possible. The champion, usually the predator, stood frozen. You could see the internal calculus happening behind his eyes, the realization that his dominance was based on the absence of this specific threat. The returning legend tilted his head, a subtle, microscopic movement that signaled supreme confidence. He didn't need a microphone to dismantle the champion. His presence was the promo. The tension was a wire pulled so tight it hummed. This was the calm shock. The realization that the hierarchy of the entire industry had shifted without a single drop of blood being spilled. The audience leaned forward in unison, hungry for the violence, yet terrified that any movement would shatter the perfection of the standoff. While the arena was in a state of suspended animation, the world behind the curtain was in absolute chaos. Producers scrambled over headsets, shouting cues that were being ignored by cameramen too mesmerized to follow orders. The timeline of the show had been obliterated. Commercials were skipped, segments were cut, and the rundown sheet was useless paper on the floor. Social media platforms began to buckle under the weight of the moment, hashtags trending worldwide within seconds. Servers lagging as millions of people tried to confirm if what they were seeing was a hallucination or reality. The line between the scripted drama and legitimate shock had vanished. In the viewing area near the gorilla position, the other wrestlers gathered around the monitors. Their faces told the real story. These weren't characters reacting. These were professionals witnessing a tectonic shift in their workplace. Some looked excited, realizing the business just got hotter. Others looked fearful, knowing their spots on the card were suddenly in jeopardy. The champions faction, usually seen laughing and scheming in the background, stood in silence, their phones blowing up with texts they were too stunned to answer. The unspoken narrative here was clear. The safety net was gone. The return didn't just affect the main event. It sent a shockwave down the entire roster. Producers stopped trying to control the timing and just let the moment breathe, realizing that you cannot put a timestamp on a miracle. The anarchy backstage mirrored the shock in the stands. Nobody was ready for this. Not the fans, not the writers, and certainly not the locker room. As the show went off the air, the legend stood tall in the center of the ring, the champion retreating up the ramp, clutching a title belt that suddenly looked like a toy. But as the copyright logo flashed on the screen, a deeper truth began to settle in. This wasn't just a happy reunion or a nostalgia pop. It was a tragedy waiting to unfold. We cheered because the hero had returned, but we failed to ask what it cost him to come back. We saw the glory. We didn't see the years of rehabilitation, the broken pride, or the quiet desperation of a man who realized he couldn't live without the roar of the crowd. The twist wasn't in the return itself, but in the look on the legend's face as the cameras faded to black. It wasn't triumph. It was a mournful realization. He had returned to slay the monster, yes, but in doing so, he had trapped himself back in the machine that broke him in the first place. The fans went home happy, buzzing with the electricity of the surprise, unaware that they had just witnessed a man signing his soul back over to the devil for one last run. The viral moment was simple. The reality was complex. The king had returned to his kingdom, only to find that the walls were closing in just as tight as they were when he left. The shock of the entrance would fade, but the weight of the expectations he just placed on his own shoulders would only get heavier. We got our moment. He got his sentence.